Okay, so estimating square roots, and this is without a calculator. There are times when you, on any standardized test, you're not allowed to use a calculator, and this is one of the times that you are supposed to do it without a calculator. So first thing I'm going to do is list the perfect squares. So 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared, 5 squared, 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared. So 1 squared, 1 times 1 is 1. 2 squared, 2 times 2 is 4. 3 squared, 3 times 3 is 9. 4 squared is 16. 5 squared is 25. 6 squared is 36. 7 squared is 49. 8 squared is 64. 9 squared, or 9 times 9, is 81. 10 squared is 100. Sorry, you can tell that I might be getting sick. So those are all the perfect squares. So the square root of 1, remember square root of 1, you're doing the opposite. So it's trying to figure out what number times itself gave you that information. So square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 64 is 8. Square root of 81 is 9. And square root of 100 is 10. So now that we have all of those listed out, let's do our first example. So if I want to estimate the square root of 45. So if I want to square root, or take the square root of 45, it's not one of these perfect squares, so we can't just write a number. We know it would be a decimal. So to do this, the first thing you're going to do, step 1, is you're going to determine, sorry, I can't talk either. Determine which 2 perfect squares the number falls between. And I'm going to use a highlighter because I really wanted to use a pink pen, but I forgot. So, step 1. So step 1, we're going to determine which 2 perfect squares the number falls between. So square root of 45 is between square root of 36, or the number 45 is between 36 and 49. So square root of 36, then it'd be square root of 45, and then square root of 49. So it's somewhere between those two, and you'll see us put this symbol. Remember, that's a greater than. So it's saying 36 is less than 45, which is less than 49. Don't let those mess you up. You really don't need to know that. That's just, I'm a math teacher, and so I like to put it properly. So we know the square root of 36, and the square root of 36 is the smaller perfect square, and then the square root of 49 is the larger perfect square. So then step 2, find square root of the perfect squares So notice I'm using the same color to highlight as I am over here. So we know the square root of 36 is 6. Hopefully you can see that green well. Yeah. And then the square root of 49 is 7. So then the square root of 45 has to be between 6 and 7. So it's between 6 and 7. Step 3, decide if it is closer to larger or smaller, and write as a decimal. Sorry, my handwriting's pretty sloppy this morning. That's a decimal, DEC. So 45, and I'm going to do this on a sticky note, so it'll just do it somewhere. It doesn't matter. I'm going to probably take it out. So if you do 45 minus 36, 36 or 7, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, so 9. And then 49 minus 45, 49 minus 45 is 4. So we know that it's closer, so I'm going to write this in orange. It has to be closer to 7. If this was split, say it was 6 and 6, then you know you would put 0.5, like 6.5. The 0.5 is the decimal you would use. Since it's closer to 7, I'm going to do 6.7. So 6.7, because it has to be closer to 7. It's not like one way or two way, so I wouldn't want to use 9. But we're going to say it's 6.7 because it's got to be closer to 7 than it should be to 6. So we decided if it was closer to the larger number or the smaller number, and we wrote it as a decimal. So 6.7. Okay, let's do another example. Let's do the square root of 94. So if I told you to write the square root of 94 on a number line, you're going to do those same steps that we just did over here. So we're going to determine which two perfect squares it falls between. So the number I just wrote was 94, so we know it's between 81 and 100. So it has to be between square root of 81 and square root of 100. The square root, and that was pink. That was our pink step. And so now we want to find the square root of those perfect numbers. So the square root of 81 is 9. and square root of 100 is 10. So then on our number line, we could do 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we know it has to be between those two. So it's going to be somewhere in this area right here. So decide, and so I'm going to subtract it. So I'm going to do 91 minus the smaller number. So that's 10 away. And then 100, so the larger number minus our number. 100 minus 91 is 9. So it is just barely closer to 100 than it is to 81. So I'm going to pretty much put it in the middle, and I would probably call it 9.6. Because it again is a little bit closer to 100 than it is to 81. Remember, the square root of 81 is 9. The square root of 100 is 10. So the square root of 81 would be at 9, square root of 100 would be 10, so we're saying that the square root of 94 would be right there on the number line. Okay? Alright, let's do one more as a negative. So if I do a negative 72, or negative square root of 72, remember if I were to take, or let's just still, sorry, I decided to do it differently. So we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at just the number for now. So 72 falls between 64 and 81. So square root of 64 and square root of 81. Well, since it's a negative, we're going to put a negative in front of both of those. The number, what they're taking the square root of, is still the same, but the only difference is that there's a negative out front, so you have to put a negative out front in both of yours. So write negative out front. Okay, so then find the square root of 64, which is 8, so it'd be negative 8. Remember, order of operations, you have to do the square root, just like you have to do an exponent first. You have to do the square root, and then you would take the negative. So then it would be negative 9. Draw it on a number line. The only thing here is, remember, when you're doing negative numbers, I would have to like 0, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8, negative 9. Okay, go ahead and subtract. So we're going to do 72 minus 64. You could do negative 72 minus 64. So 64 to 70 would be 6, 7, 8. So it's 8. And then 81 minus 72 will be 9. Okay, and then now let's estimate it. So we know it's closer to 81, and it just so happened that all of them were slightly closer to that bigger number. So it's going to be closer to this one. So it's going to be closer to that, just barely. So it would be negative 8.6. So the square root, or the negative square root of 72, I'm going to estimate it to be negative 8.6. I'm sorry that I wrote really little. So negative square root of 72 and negative 8.6. So that's how you estimate them. It's not too hard, I just did a whole lot of extra explaining.